I held my mother's hand as the monitors around her clicked softly, each sound a reminder that her time was slipping away. The hospital room was dim, washed in the pale glow of machines, but all I could see was her face. My mother had always been the anchor of our family, the only one who believed in me when I chose to wear the uniform and serve in the Middle East. She saw strength where others saw only absence. She understood that sacrifice was love in its hardest form. Before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if stories of courage and resilience speak to you. And share in the comments where you are listening from and what hour it is in your corner of the world. It is always moving to see how far these stories travel and whose hearts they reach. This is more than just a story, it's a reminder that no soldier ever fights alone. Her breathing grew shallow, and I whispered promises into the still air. I told her I would carry her lessons with me, that I would not let her life or her faith in me be forgotten. When she squeezed my hand one final time, I knew it was not just a goodbye. It was her passing me the weight of everything she had held for so long. My phone buzzed on the tray beside the bed. The message came from my brother Daniel. It read, plain and cold, finish the funeral quickly, then get ready for the will. There were no words of grief, no pause for the woman who had raised us both. Just urgency about property, about inheritance, about what he thought was owed to him. That was the beginning of the war none of us expected. The rain was relentless that morning, hammering against the windshield as if the sky itself wanted to keep me from leaving. Wipers scraped back and forth, a steady rhythm against the storm. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, leaning forward to catch a clearer view of the road. The old truck shuddered every time the water pooled too deep on the pavement, but I pressed the gas anyway. I had been through worse. Convoys across sandstorms in Iraq. Black nights in Kandahar where every bump in the road might hide an IED. Rain on an American highway was not going to break me. Still, there was something about this storm that felt personal, like it carried a message. Beside me, my stepfather sat silently, his hands folded tight on his lap. He was not a man of many words, especially these past few months. Grief had turned him into a ghost who moved quietly from room to room, in the back seat. My little sister hugged her backpack as if it were a shield. She was only 17 and already had the look of someone older, someone who had seen too much. When she caught me glancing at her in the rearview mirror, she gave me a small smile that barely reached her eyes. Inside my jacket, pressed against my chest, was the photograph. It was the one thing I refused to leave behind that morning. My mother at 22, wearing her army nurse uniform, smiling with a confidence that could light up a dark hangar. The edges of the photo were frayed, the colors faded from years of being handled. I had carried it once in my rucksack on deployment, tucked between letters and ration cards. It was proof of where I came from, of who had shown me how to serve with both courage and compassion. The road stretched on, slick and empty. My thoughts wandered to the night before, sitting beside her bed, listening to her breaths grow shorter. I had whispered the only promise I knew I could keep. I will stand firm, Mom, no matter what comes. The machines had beeped in steady time, and then suddenly they didn't. I had learned to face death overseas, but nothing prepared me for watching it take my mother while the rest of the world kept spinning. Now, with every mile, I carried both her memory and her mission. The lawyer's office waited ahead. The will, the reckoning, and Daniel. Even his name made my jaw clench. My brother and I had not spoken more than a few clipped sentences in years. We grew up under the same roof, yet it felt like we were raised on different planets. He was the golden boy, sharp suits and charming smiles, always knowing how to win over a room. I was the one who chose boots and uniforms, deserts and deployments. He never forgave me for leaving, and I never forgave him for staying only to chase money and influence. When the doctors said Mom's time was short, Daniel rarely visited. He sent flowers. He sent money, but he did not sit with her through the long nights. That was left to me. And yet now, he would be front and center, waiting to claim what he thought was his. The rain grew heavier as we entered the city. Tall buildings loomed through the fogged glass, their outlines blurred like half-remembered dreams. I parked near the brick office building where Attorney Whitman had his practice. The lot was already half full. My stepfather sighed quietly, the sound of a man bracing himself for battle he did not want to fight. My sister tucked her hair behind her ears, her hands trembling just slightly. I took a breath, steady and deep, the way we were taught before stepping out on patrol. Inhale, hold, exhale. My boots splashed through puddles as we walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the storm wanted to drag me backward. Inside, the lobby was warm and smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. The secretary gave us a sympathetic nod, her eyes flicking briefly to the black dress I wore. I kept one hand pressed against my jacket, against the photo. My mother's eyes in that picture seemed to look right through me, reminding me of what mattered. We took our seats in the waiting area. I scanned the room automatically, an old habit from the army: exit doors, windows, number of people inside, but my mind wasn't on security. It was on him, and then he arrived. Daniel swept in as if the storm outside had been waiting for his cue. He shook the water from his expensive coat, his wife trailing behind in heels far too high for a rainy day, carrying their toddler son in her arms. Daniel's smile was quick, practiced, the kind that had always fooled teachers and neighbors. To most, he looked like a successful businessman, a devoted father, a man in control. To me, he looked like greed dressed in fine clothing. He spotted me instantly, and our eyes locked. For a heartbeat, the years fell away. We were kids again, standing in the same kitchen, each wanting our mother's attention in different ways. But the moment passed. His expression hardened, and so did mine. He strolled over, glancing briefly at our stepfather and sister as if they were background props in his play. Then he focused on me. "You made it," he said, his voice smooth but edged with something sharper. I didn't answer. My silence was my shield. His wife gave me a polite smile, though it did not reach her eyes. She adjusted the child on her hip, her jewelry catching the light. The little boy stared at me with wide eyes, innocent and unknowing. I forced a smile for him, though inside my chest the storm raged on. Daniel leaned slightly closer. "Let's get this over with. The sooner we finish, the sooner we can move on. Move on, as if grief were something you could pencil into a schedule and then erase, as if our mother were nothing more than a line item in his busy life." I clenched my jaw but stayed silent. Words were his weapon. Mine was endurance. The secretary announced that Mr. Whitman would see us shortly. We were ushered down a hallway lined with framed diplomas and photos of the lawyer shaking hands with local officials. The air smelled of rain-soaked coats and tension. In the conference room, a long, polished table waited, with neat stacks of documents and a box of tissues placed in the center like some sort of ironic centerpiece. My stepfather sat heavily in a chair, my sister close beside him. I chose a seat at the far end, my back straight, eyes steady. Daniel, of course, chose the seat nearest the head of the table. His wife settled beside him, fussing with their child. He looked every bit the heir apparent, certain of victory. I kept one hand pressed against my jacket, feeling the photograph there, feeling my mother's gaze on me. She had always said that strength was not about volume, but about presence. You did not need to shout to be powerful. Sometimes all you had to do was sit still and let the truth speak when the time came. And I knew the time was coming. The room filled with silence, thick and suffocating, as if the storm outside had followed us in and now pressed against the windows. I sat at the far end of the table, my gaze steady, my body still. Old instincts from my years in uniform had taught me the value of silence. In the army, quiet could mean survival. Here, it was my only shield against Daniel's practiced charm. Attorney Whitman entered, carrying a thick folder under his arm. He was an older man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. His handshake with my stepfather was brief, his nod to my sister gentle. When his gaze fell on Daniel, it lingered for just a fraction too long, as if he had already measured him and found something lacking. Finally, his eyes found me. I felt a weight there, not judgment but expectation. We all sat. The rain drummed a relentless rhythm on the roof above us, and the old clock on the wall ticked in counterpoint. Whitman adjusted his glasses, opened the folder, and cleared his throat. But before he could speak, Daniel leaned forward, his smile too bright, his voice cutting into the room. "Let's not drag this out. We all know why we're here. Mom wanted things to be handled quickly, without drama. She would want us to move forward, not dwell." His words made my stepfather flinch. My sister lowered her gaze to the table, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. My chest burned with anger, but I forced my breathing steady. Daniel had skipped the hospital nights, skipped the pain, skipped everything that mattered, and now he dared to speak for her. Whitman raised a hand, calm but firm. "Mr. Miller, with respect, this is not your script. We will proceed as your mother instructed." Daniel leaned back, annoyed but silent, his jaw tightening. His wife patted his arm, whispering something to soothe his ego. Whitman began to read through formalities, listing assets, properties, accounts. His voice was measured, deliberate, each word a step closer to revelation. I listened, my hand pressed to the photograph hidden in my jacket. I thought of Mom in her uniform, of the quiet strength she had carried through war and through motherhood. As Whitman spoke, my thoughts drifted back to childhood. Daniel had always been the one who charmed teachers, who won trophies, who basked in applause. I had been the quiet one, the girl who preferred books and long runs along the river. When I enlisted, he told me I was wasting my life, throwing away potential. He never understood that my service was not about potential, but about purpose. Mom had understood. She had served herself. She had carried her own scars. That bond between us was something Daniel could never touch. The lawyer's voice pulled me back. He spoke of debts settled, of properties sold, of careful planning that my mother had done in her final months. His tone carried respect, even affection. I wondered how many times she had sat in this very room. Her frail body wrapped in determination, making sure her children's futures were mapped out. Daniel shifted in his chair, restless. He expected to hear his name tied to numbers, to deeds, to titles. He expected to win as he always had. His son fussed in his wife's arms, crying softly, the sound startling in the heavy silence. She bounced him gently, her eyes flicking nervously between her husband and the lawyer. Finally, Whitman paused. The storm outside seemed to hush for a moment, as if even the rain wanted to listen. There are specific bequests, he said, adjusting his glasses again. To Daniel Miller, she leaves. Daniel straightened, his smile already forming, the wedding ring of his late father. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Daniel's smile faltered. He blinked as if he had misheard. The ring? Yes, Whitman replied calmly. The gold band kept in her jewelry box. She asked that it be passed to you. Daniel laughed, sharp and disbelieving. A ring, that is all. Whitman's expression did not change. That is her bequest to you. Daniel's wife shifted uncomfortably. My sister bit her lip, fighting a smile she quickly hid. My stepfather stared at the table, sorrow etched deep into his features. Whitman continued. To Emily Miller, he said, and my sister looked up with wide eyes. She leaves the family quilt sewn by her grandmother, to remind her of home and roots. Tears filled Emily's eyes. She nodded quickly, clutching the memory to her chest, though it was not yet in her hands. For her, the quilt was more than fabric. It was belonging. It was history. Whitman took a breath, his gaze shifting to me. The air in the room tightened. I could feel Daniel's stare burning into me, demanding, daring. And to Sarah Miller, Whitman said, his voice steady, she leaves the remainder of her estate, all properties, accounts, and assets in full. The words struck like thunder. For a moment, I could not breathe. I had prepared myself for disappointment, for being overlooked, for another silent sacrifice. But instead, she had chosen me, not out of favoritism, I knew, but out of trust. Daniel exploded. This is absurd. She was not in her right mind. She would never do this. This is manipulation. Whitman raised a hand again. Mr. Miller, your mother was of sound mind. These are her wishes, signed, witnessed, and notarized. There is no ambiguity. Daniel slammed his palm against the table, making the tissues jump. His son began to cry louder, frightened by the sudden noise. His wife hushed the child quickly, but her eyes darted nervously around the room as if she wanted to disappear. I sat still, my hands folded, my heart pounding but my face calm. This was my battlefield now, and silence was my armor. Whitman reached into the folder and pulled out an envelope. There is also a letter. She asked that it be read aloud here today. The envelope was worn, her handwriting across the front in careful script. He opened it gently, unfolding the paper inside. His voice softened as he read. My children, if you are hearing this, then my time with you is over. I have no wealth greater than the lessons I tried to teach you. Daniel, you have always loved the spotlight, the applause, the approval of others, but I want you to know that applause fades. Charm without substance is hollow. I hope you will find a way to see beyond yourself. Sarah, my quiet warrior, you have carried burdens in silence, walked through fire without complaint. You have given to your country and to this family without ever asking for recognition. You understand what endurance means. That is why I leave you what remains of my life's work, not as a prize, but as a trust. Use it not for yourself alone, but for others who need a place to rest, to heal, to begin again. And Emily, my sweet girl, hold on to our roots. Remember that strength is not in leaving behind where we come from, but in carrying it with us. I love you all, even when I do not understand you, even when you do not understand me. The words broke me open. Tears slipped down my face before I could stop them. My sister sobbed quietly, clutching our stepfather's arm. He wept openly, his shoulders shaking. Daniel's face was pale with fury. He shook his head violently. This is a lie. She would not humiliate me like this. Whitman folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the envelope. Mr. Miller, these were her words, her choice. There is no deception here. Daniel stood, pacing like a caged animal, his hands clenched, his voice rising. I will contest this. I will not let her memory be twisted. I rose slowly, meeting his gaze. My voice was quiet but firm, the way we were trained to speak on the radio in combat, calm, controlled, unshakable. You were not there, Daniel, not in the hospital, not in the nights when she cried, not when she told me she wanted this. You cannot twist what you abandoned. His face flushed with rage. For once he had no clever retort. His wife reached for his arm, her eyes pleading. He pulled away, but he did not speak. The storm outside roared again, rain lashing against the windows as if to seal the moment. I sat back down, the photograph still pressed against my chest, my mother's smile shining through faded paper. She had trusted me. She had believed in me, and I would not fail her. This was not victory, it was responsibility, and it had only just begun. The lawyer's words still echoed inside me long after he closed the folder. My mother's letter, her voice carried across that table, had left a mark none of us could erase. Yet as the papers were gathered and the pens capped, the storm inside the room did not ease. It only shifted, found a new place to coil. We moved back into the waiting area, a narrow corridor lined with framed photographs of men in suits shaking hands, men who had made their fortunes by cutting deals. Their smiles looked frozen, brittle, as if even they knew the truth would outlast them. I chose a seat against the far wall. My stepfather lowered himself into the chair beside me, his face drawn, his body sagging as though the years had landed all at once. Emily perched on his other side, quiet, her quilt not yet in her arms but already clutched in her heart. Across the room, Daniel stood tall, his wife seated with their restless baby. He smoothed his tie, adjusted his cufflinks, every gesture rehearsed. On the surface, he was composed, but the glint in his eyes told me what he was really doing, calculating, plotting. He spoke first, his tone warm, polite, the voice he used at fundraisers and business luncheons. I suppose congratulations are in order, Sarah. You must be very pleased with yourself. The words were honey, but I heard the poison beneath. I did not answer. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands in my lap, the way I had during endless briefings overseas. Silence was sometimes the best shield. It unsettled men like Daniel, who thrived on reaction, who needed applause to measure his own worth. He tried again. You know, service is noble, I will grant you that, but nobility does not keep the lights on. It does not pay property taxes or maintain estates. Money is what matters in the end. Influence, position. I have spent my life understanding that. Mother should have understood it too. My jaw tightened, but still I said nothing. I thought of my mother in uniform, tending to wounded soldiers, her hands steady even when the world was breaking. I thought of my own deployments, the nights when the only light came from flares and the only sound was the crack of gunfire. He thought money made the world turn. I knew it was sacrifice. Quiet, unseen, unthanked sacrifice. Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping low so the lawyer's staff could not hear. You think she chose you because of trust. Let me be clear. She was manipulated. She was weak. And you, with your uniform and your sad stories, you made yourself look like the martyr she wanted. But you will not hold this for long. I will see to that. His words stung, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing it. I steadied my breath, felt the floor beneath my boots, remembered training drills when holding still was survival. My stepfather shifted, sensing the tension. He placed a hand on my knee, his touch light but grounding. Emily glanced at me, her eyes wide, silently pleading for me not to rise to Daniel's bait. The waiting room had turned into something more than a hallway with chairs. It felt like a courtroom. No judge, no jury, only the weight of judgment in the air. Each of us sat with our roles assigned. Daniel, the accuser, his wife, the silent witness, my stepfather, the weary guardian, Emily, the frightened but hopeful younger sibling, and me, the soldier, the defendant, the heir. The storm outside pounded against the windows, wind howling like distant artillery. I stared at the streaks of water racing down the glass, thinking how similar they looked to tears, except the sky did not weep out of weakness. It wept out of release. Daniel paced, rehearsing his case as if preparing to stand before a judge. You see, Sarah has never built anything of value. She has no business experience, no financial acumen. She lived off discipline, not dollars. And discipline does not keep estates intact. Do you even know what a trust is? Do you know how to manage accounts? You will sink, and when you do, I will be there to clean up the mess. I finally lifted my eyes to his. My voice was calm, steady, clipped like a radio transmission. I have lived through worse than your disapproval. I have held dying men in my arms, Daniel. I have listened to their last words. You think I will break because of you? You are nothing compared to that. His smirk faltered. For a moment, his charm cracked. He turned away, muttering something under his breath, then kissed the top of his son's head as if to prove to himself he still had control. Silence stretched again. It was not empty silence, but heavy, thick, like sand filling a trench. My stepfather leaned his head back against the wall, eyes closed, lips moving in a quiet prayer. Emily fiddled with her necklace, her fingers trembling. The receptionist moved about softly, setting cups of coffee on a side table, her eyes never lingering too long on us. She understood this was not her battle, but she moved with the caution of someone who knew landmines lay hidden. Whitman's assistant appeared briefly, offering that we could leave soon, that certified copies would follow. She smiled a professional smile, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. She knew, too. She had witnessed families fracture in this very room before. She knew we were not the first and would not be the last. As the door closed behind her, Daniel chuckled. The sound was low. Bitter, you think silence makes you strong, Sarah. It does not. It makes you irrelevant. You will learn that soon enough. I looked at him, my face still. Silence has kept men alive, Daniel. It has kept me alive, and it will outlast your noise. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. The rain eased slightly, softening from a roar to a steady patter. The tension in the room did not ease with it. It only deepened, like water seeping into soil, hidden but spreading. I closed my eyes for a moment and saw my mother's face again, her smile as she folded laundry, her laugh as she burned Sunday pancakes, her strength as she carried the weight of her own service without ever demanding recognition. She had trusted me with her legacy, with her life's work, and I would honor it. The waiting felt endless. Every tick of the clock was a drumbeat toward confrontation. We were not in a courtroom, but it felt like one. No judge, no verdict yet. But the sentence was already written in the air. Daniel was right about one thing. This was not over. It was only the beginning of a war that would not be fought with rifles or artillery, but with words, papers, lawyers, and silence. A different kind of battlefield, one I was ready for. Daniel did not sit down again. He lingered near the window, hands tucked in his pockets, staring out at the rain as if the world owed him an answer. His reflection glimmered faintly in the glass, a tall silhouette framed by streaks of water. I could see the set of his jaw, the twitch of his lips, the restless shifting of a man used to winning. At last he turned, his voice low, measured, almost conversational. You know, contesting a will is not as hard as people think. All it takes is the right lawyer and the right judge. The fact is, our mother was ill, weak, vulnerable. A court could be persuaded that she was influenced, coerced even. That letter she wrote could be seen as manipulation, a tool used to secure the inheritance for you. And once the question is raised, everything freezes. Assets locked, properties tied up. You will not be able to touch a dime. Do you really want to spend the next few years watching it all rot in legal limbo? His words landed heavy, sharp as blades. My stepfather shifted uncomfortably, his hand gripping the armrest until his knuckles whitened. Emily's breath caught, a tiny gasp she tried to stifle. I kept my voice steady, my eyes locked on his. If that is the path you choose, Daniel, then so be it. But know this, I will not bend. I did not bend in the desert when sandstorms blinded me and mortars shook the ground. I will not bend to you. His smirk returned, thin and cruel, always the soldier speaking in metaphors. This is not a battlefield, Sarah. This is real life, and in real life, money wins. The truth was, part of me feared he was right. Courts did not always honor truth. They honored arguments, evidence, the weight of influence. Daniel had friends in high places, allies who owed him favors. I had memories and scars and my mother's trust, which would hold stronger. The doubt crept in, quiet but insistent. What if the estate became a war zone of paperwork and hearings? What if everything Mom worked for was frozen until it lost its meaning? I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the photograph through my jacket. Her smile steadied me, reminded me of her faith. She had not chosen me for my wealth or charm. She had chosen me for my endurance, and endurance was not about avoiding storms. It was about standing in them until they passed. Daniel circled the room like a predator. His wife kept her head low, bouncing the restless child. She did not meet my eyes. I wondered if she ever questioned the man she had married, or if she had learned, like so many others, to stay silent in his shadow. He stopped behind my chair, close enough that I could feel his breath. Do you really think you deserve this, Sarah? You left. You chose the army over this family. You abandoned us for your uniforms and your medals. And now you walk back in, expecting to be rewarded. I stood slowly, turning to face him. My voice was calm, even. I did not abandon this family. I served this country so you could chase your deals and your parties without fear. I stood in places you cannot imagine so Emily could sleep safely in her bed. Our mother understood that. She saw sacrifice, not absence. She saw service, not abandonment. For a heartbeat, silence. Then his laughter filled the room, bitter and sharp. Service, sacrifice, big words for someone who has nothing to show for it. You came back with nothing but scars. Meanwhile, I built something. I created a name, a business, a legacy. And you think a few deployments make you worthy of everything? No court will buy it. No one will buy it. I did not flinch. His words were meant to pierce, but I had been pierced before, by shrapnel, by grief, by the sound of a friend's last breath in the dust. His contempt was nothing compared to that. I sat back down, folding my hands. You are right about one thing, Daniel. I came back with scars. But scars are not weakness. They are proof I survived, and survival, not money, is the true legacy. Emily reached for my hand under the table, her small fingers squeezing mine. Her eyes shone with tears, but there was pride there too. She believed me. That mattered more than anything Daniel could say. The rain outside slowed, the thunder fading into distance. The storm had not ended, but it had shifted. Inside, the tension still pressed heavy, every breath strained. Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You think silence and scars will save you? You are mistaken. I will not stop. I will drag this through every court in the state if I must. And when you are exhausted, when the cost is too high, you will come crawling, and then I will take everything. His words were not a threat, they were a promise. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, drawing strength from memory. Nights on base, when the world was so dark it felt endless. The sound of comrades laughing quietly despite the danger, finding joy in scraps. The way we held each other up when there was nothing else to hold. My mother had been part of that legacy too, tending to soldiers, patching wounds, carrying burdens no one saw. She had known what it meant to stand when others wanted to collapse. When I opened my eyes, I met his stare without fear. Then prepare yourself, Daniel, because I will not crawl, I will not break, and I will not let you erase her trust. Something in my tone unsettled him. He blinked just once. Before looking away, his smile faltered, but only for a heartbeat. Then he straightened, masking himself again in confidence. The receptionist entered, reminding us gently that the office was closing. My stepfather rose slowly, his movements weary but deliberate. Emily clutched his arm, her eyes still red. Daniel gathered his coat, his wife already on her feet, their child whining. He glanced at me one last time. This is not over, he said quietly. I nodded. I know. We left the office into air still heavy with rain. The storm clouds had begun to break, shafts of light piercing through. My boots splashed through shallow puddles, the damp air clinging to my skin. I drew in a deep breath, tasting the sharpness of rain, the smell of earth washed clean. The battle was far from over. It had only just begun. But as I walked toward the truck, my hand pressed against the photograph of my mother, I felt her with me. Her faith, her courage, her legacy. She had trusted me to carry it forward, and I would, no matter what storms lay ahead. The conference room felt smaller than it had when we first walked in, as if the air itself had thickened and pressed against us. Attorney Whitman sat at the head of the table, the folder before him like a sealed vault waiting to be opened. The storm outside had softened to a steady drizzle, but inside the tension was still a storm of its own. My stepfather leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his weathered hands clasped tightly as if in prayer. Emily sat beside him, her foot tapping nervously against the carpet. Daniel lounged in his chair with forced ease, his arm draped along the back, his polished shoe tapping in rhythm with his impatience. His wife kept their restless toddler on her lap, shushing him with a practiced smile. Whitman cleared his throat, slipping on his glasses. Your mother's will is clear, he began, his voice steady, practiced from years of reading the words that divided families. I will read her instructions as they were written. Daniel smirked as though he already knew the script. In his mind, this was merely formality, a polite transition before what he believed was already his. Whitman's voice carried over the polished table. To Daniel Miller, I leave the wedding band of his late father. The words fell heavy, unmistakable. Daniel's smirk froze. Excuse me. Whitman did not flinch. Your mother specified that her husband's ring should go to you. It is her wish. Daniel leaned forward. His eyes wide, his voice sharpening. The ring, that's it, a piece of jewelry. Whitman adjusted the pages. Yes, a gold band held in her jewelry box. For the first time in years, Daniel looked like the ground had shifted beneath him. He laughed, but there was no humor in it, only disbelief. This is a mistake. She was not well. She did not know what she was doing. Whitman's gaze was calm, unwavering. Your mother was of sound mind when she signed this will. I oversaw it personally. Daniel opened his mouth again, but Whitman pressed forward, his voice steady as stone. To Emily Miller, she leaves the family quilt, hand-sewn by her grandmother, a piece of our heritage meant to remind her of where she comes from. Emily gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears brimmed in her eyes, and for the first time that day I saw her shoulders loosen as if a weight had lifted. She nodded quickly, her lips trembling. For her. That quilt was not a scrap of cloth. It was warmth, love stitched through generations, a gift that would outlast wealth. Daniel shifted in his seat, muttering under his breath, but Whitman did not stop. His eyes found mine, his tone deepening. And to Sarah Miller, she leaves the remainder of her estate, all properties, accounts, and assets in full. The words struck like thunder. For a long moment, I could not breathe. My heart hammered in my chest. The photograph of my mother inside my jacket pressing against me like proof. She had trusted me, chosen me, not as a prize, but as a charge. Emily gasped again, then looked at me with wide eyes, not in envy, but in awe. My stepfather bowed his head, relief etched across his tired face. He knew, as I did, that this had been her will all along. Daniel shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently across the floor. His voice rose sharp and furious. This is outrageous. She was not herself when she wrote this. She must have been manipulated, influenced. She would never humiliate me like this. His wife froze, clutching their child tighter. The boy began to cry, startled by the eruption. Emily flinched, pressing closer to our stepfather. I sat still, though inside my pulse raced. My training had taught me how to hold steady under fire. This was no different. Daniel's anger was shrapnel, sharp and loud. But I had endured worse. Whitman did not waver. Mr. Miller, your mother's will is clear. It was signed and notarized under my supervision. It cannot be dismissed as weakness or confusion. These are her words. Daniel slammed his hand on the table, the tissues in the center scattering. She loved me. I was her firstborn. She would not cut me out. My voice came quietly steady. Love does not excuse greed, Daniel. She saw who you had become, and she trusted me. Because she knew I would not betray her wishes. His glare cut across the table, fury and humiliation burning in his eyes. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You think you've won, but this is not over. I will take this to court. I will destroy every word of that paper if I have to. Whitman raised his voice just slightly enough to cut through the storm. Your mother anticipated that possibility. She left a letter to be read aloud today. He opened a fresh envelope. Unfolding the paper with care, my mother's handwriting sprawled across the page, familiar and steady. As Whitman began to read, her voice filled the room, carried on his tone, threading through my heart. My children, if you are hearing this, then I am gone. Do not waste time fighting shadows. I made my choices with a clear mind and a full heart. The words silenced even Daniel. Daniel, you have always craved attention, the spotlight, the praise of others, but applause fades, charm is fleeting. I pray you will learn to seek something deeper, something lasting, not power, not possessions, but character. Daniel's face hardened, but he said nothing. Emily, my sweet girl, you are still so young, but your heart is old and wise. The quilt is more than fabric. It is the memory of our family, the warmth of those who came before you. Carry it well. Emily sobbed openly now, her head bent, tears spilling onto her lap. And Sarah, my quiet warrior, you carried the weight of service with dignity. You bore scars without complaint. You gave to this country and to this family in silence when no one else was watching. I leave you what remains of my life, not as a reward, but as a trust. Use it to serve others. Build a place where those who come home broken can find rest. Let this be your mission, as mine once was. Tears blurred my vision. Her words pierced deeper than any weapon. She had not simply given me property. She had given me purpose. Whitman folded the letter gently, his voice soft. That is the entirety. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the soft sobs of my sister and the cry of Daniel's child. My stepfather wiped his eyes with a trembling hand. Daniel stood frozen, his fists clenched, his face pale with fury. "This is lies," he spat. "All lies. She was not in her right mind." I rose slowly, meeting his eyes. My voice was low but unshaken. "She was clear, Daniel. She trusted me, and I will not let you take that away." The storm outside rumbled again. A distant growl of thunder. Inside, the true storm had only just begun. Chapter 3, Part 2. Daniel did not sit back down. He stood rigid at the end of the table, his hands pressed flat against the polished wood as if sheer force could bend reality to his will. His face was pale, drained of charm, his eyes lit with the fury of a man who believed the universe had betrayed him. "You all sit here nodding along as if this is gospel," he said, his voice trembling at the edges. "But it is not. It is fraud. It is manipulation." She was old, sick, fused. Sarah played nurse and savior, and now she reaps the rewards. Whitman remained calm, his gaze steady. "Mr. Miller, I can assure you your mother's will was signed with full understanding of its contents. She was lucid, deliberate. I would not be standing here otherwise." Daniel scoffed, pacing, his shoes squeaking against the floor. "Lucid, she could barely stand some days. You expect me to believe she had the strength to divide everything she owned with such precision?" Whitman's tone did not waver. "Yes, because I sat across from her as she did it. She was very clear, Mr. Miller. She knew exactly what she wanted." His words only fueled Daniel's anger. He turned on me, his finger stabbing the air. "And you, sitting there smug, silent, like you've earned something. You abandoned this family. You left us for deserts and uniforms, and now you come back with your scars and your stories, pretending you're some kind of hero." And she buys it. She always bought it. The venom in his voice cut deep, but I refused to show it. I kept my breath steady, the way I had on night patrols when fear slithered close and silence was the only weapon. "She trusted me," I said quietly, "not because of medals or scars, because I stayed when it mattered, because I listened when she spoke, because I did not treat her like a burden." The words struck him like a slap. His jaw tightened, his fists curling at his sides. His wife shifted nervously in her chair, her arms tightening around their crying son. The child's wail filled the room, raw and piercing, as if he sensed the fracture splitting his family apart. Emily pressed closer to our stepfather, her face wet with tears. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Daniel, please stop." But Daniel did not stop. He leaned over the table, his voice dropping low, dangerous. "You think this is settled. It is not. I will not let you walk out of here with everything. I will drag this through court, through every judge and every jury I can find. And when the money runs out, when the lawyers drain you dry, you will regret ever thinking you could hold on." His words were a blade sharp with intent. For a moment, the weight of them pressed down on me, heavy as body armor. I thought of hearings, of endless legal battles, of assets frozen, of time slipping through my fingers. I thought of him circling like a vulture, waiting for me to stumble. But then I thought of her, my mother in her uniform, her hand steady on a soldier's wound. My mother, sitting across from Whitman, her back straight, her voice clear, her pen scratching her name with purpose. She had not wavered, she had not doubted, and she had trusted me to do the same. I rose from my chair, slow and deliberate. The photograph inside my jacket pressed against my chest like a heartbeat. I met Daniel's eyes without flinching. "You can take me to court," I said, my voice low but firm. "You can spend every dollar you have trying to undo her wishes, but you will fail, because this is not about money, Daniel. This is about legacy, and legacy is not built on greed. It is built on sacrifice. You do not know what that means, but I do." The room fell silent. The storm outside had faded to a soft drizzle, but the air inside still thrummed with tension. Daniel's face twisted, caught between fury and disbelief. For once, he seemed to have no words. Whitman cleared his throat gently, as if reminding us all that he was still present. "The will is final. The assets will transfer as instructed. There is nothing further to discuss." But we all knew that was not true. There was plenty further to discuss. Only not here, not now. Daniel grabbed his coat, his movements sharp, violent. His wife scrambled to gather their child, her eyes wide with unease. Without another word, he stormed toward the door, the sound of it slamming behind him echoing through the office like a gunshot. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. My stepfather sighed heavily, his hand rubbing his temples. Whitman removed his glasses, polishing them slowly, his eyes flicking to me with a look I could not quite read. I sank back into my chair, my body trembling now that the moment had passed. My mother's words lingered in my ears, stronger than Daniel's rage. She had given me more than property. She had given me a mission. Build a place for those who come home broken. Let this be your mission, as mine once was. The weight of it pressed on me, heavier than any rucksack I had carried overseas. It was not just about keeping the estate. It was about what I would do with it, how I would honor her, how I would stand not just for myself, but for others who needed a place to rest, to heal, to begin again. I closed my eyes, breathing in slow, steady. The war with Daniel was only beginning, but beneath it, a deeper truth had already taken root. This was not about fighting him. It was about fulfilling her. When I opened my eyes again, I knew the path would not be easy. It would be long, bruising, filled with trials, both legal and personal. Daniel would come at me with every weapon he had, but I had something stronger. I had her voice, her faith, her trust, and I intended to carry it, no matter how heavy it became. Whitman's voice softened when he unfolded the final letter, as if the paper itself carried more weight than any legal document could. The storm outside had thinned to drizzle, but inside the conference room the tension was thick, bracing. When his voice filled the air, it was as though my mother herself had stepped back into the room. My children, if you are hearing this, then I have left this world, but I have not left you. My love is stitched into every memory you carry, every breath you take forward. I have no greater gift than the lessons I tried to live. Her words wrapped around me, pulling me back to nights at the kitchen table when she would tell stories from her own time in uniform, stories that carried pain but also pride. She was not one for grand speeches, but she knew how to place truth into simple sentences that never left you. To Daniel, my firstborn, you have always been clever, always eager to stand in the light where others could see you. But character is not measured by applause. Crowds will cheer for anyone who entertains them, but true strength is what you do in silence when no one is watching. My hope for you is that you will look past appearances and find the man you are when the lights fade. Daniel stiffened across the table, his face tightening as if each word cut. His jaw clenched, but he forced himself to stay still. I could see in his eyes the insult he felt, the humiliation of being seen so clearly. Whitman's voice carried on. To Sarah, my quiet warrior, you have given your country and this family more than most will ever know. You have carried burdens without complaint, walked through storms without fanfare. You know the meaning of sacrifice. You know that responsibility is not a weight, but a calling. That is why I leave you what remains of my life's work. It is not a reward, Sarah. It is a trust. I closed my eyes, her words pouring into me. It was as if she were sitting beside me again, her hand on mine, steady and sure. Her letter was not finished. I ask you, Sarah, to use this not only for yourself, build something lasting, a place for those who, like you, came home carrying scars the world cannot see, a place where families of veterans can gather, where silence is not a prison but a comfort. Let this be our legacy together, you and I. Hand in hand, even if I am gone, carry it forward. I pressed my hand against my jacket, against the photograph of her as a young army nurse. Her smile looked out at me through faded paper, a bridge across time. She was still leading me. She was still asking me to serve. Whitman folded the letter carefully, as if handling something sacred, his voice lowered. That is the end of her words. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the muffled crying of Daniel's son and the ticking of the wall clock. Emily wiped her face with trembling hands, her tears falling freely. My stepfather bowed his head, his lips moving in silent prayer. Daniel was the first to break the silence. He laughed, sharp and bitter. So that's it. A lecture dressed up as a farewell. She always did favor you, Sarah, always turned your silence into something noble, and now she uses it as an excuse to strip me of what is rightfully mine. His wife shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to the floor. The child whimpered, sensing the unrest in the air. I stayed quiet. Words were unnecessary. My mother's voice was still in the room, louder than any protest Daniel could make. But inside, a different storm was brewing. Her request was clear. Build a place for those who came home broken, carry forward our legacy. The weight of it pressed against me, heavier than any rucksack I had shouldered overseas. It was not just money, not just land. It was responsibility, alive and breathing. It was a mission, and missions had never scared me. I thought of the men and women I had served with, faces that still visited me at night. Some had made it home, some had not. Some carried visible wounds, others invisible ones. Too many had been left adrift, forgotten in their own country. My mother had seen it in her time too, tending to soldiers who came back from Vietnam, from the Gulf, carrying silence like a wound. She had built her life around healing them, even in small ways. Now she was asking me to take that mantle. Build something greater. Daniel slammed his palm against the table, jolting everyone. Do you hear how absurd this is? She wants you to build some kind of center, some sanctuary for broken soldiers. That is not an investment. That is a waste. Money rotting away in charity while I could turn it into something that lasts. My voice came low, steady. What lasts, Daniel, is not what you build for yourself. It is what you build for others. She knew that you never will. His face reddened, his fists clenching. For a moment, I thought he might strike the table again, or worse. But he pulled back, gathering his coat instead. His words hissed through the air as he turned to leave. This is not over. I will not let her memory be twisted into this farce. I will bury you in court if I must. The door slammed behind him, leaving the room vibrating with the force of his rage. I sat back, my heart pounding, the echo of my mother's words still steady in my ears. Not a reward, a trust. Build something lasting. Carry it forward. It was not going to be easy. He would come after me with every weapon at his disposal, but I had been trained to face long battles. I had learned to endure, and now I had more than training. I had her. The office was quieter after Daniel's storming exit, but it was not peace. The silence felt fragile, like a porcelain vase left teetering on the edge of a shelf. Emily sniffled beside our stepfather, the quilt already clutched tightly against her chest. Her tears were not just grief. They carried relief too, as though our mother's words had affirmed what she had always known but never dared to speak aloud. Whitman stacked the papers carefully, his movements deliberate. As though order could be restored through neat piles, he cleared his throat softly. Sarah, we will begin the process of transferring the estate immediately. I will be in touch about the legal steps. I must warn you, though, your brother has every right to contest the will. He may attempt to delay, though the foundation of the document is sound. Your mother prepared well. I nodded, my jaw tightening. She always prepared well. Whitman's eyes softened. He had known her, too. Perhaps not as deeply as we had, but enough to respect her. Do not let his threats undo you. He can stir up trouble, yes, but this will hold. When we finally stepped out of the office, the drizzle had lightened to a mist, the kind that lingered in the air and clung to your skin. The streets smelled of wet asphalt, of autumn leaves plastered to the sidewalk. Emily held my hand as we walked to the car, her small fingers trembling. Sarah, she whispered, her voice breaking. Do you really think you can do it? Build the place Mom talked about? Her question cut deeper than Daniel's accusations. Could I? I was a soldier, not a builder. I had fought wars, not drawn blueprints. I had patched wounds in the field with nothing but grit and a steady hand, but creating a center that could stand for generations, that was a battle of its own. Yet the photograph pressed against my chest, my mother's young face looking out at me in her army uniform. Her eyes in that picture were the same eyes that had looked at me across countless kitchen tables, the same eyes that had seen me through deployment and homecoming. She believed I could. Yes, I said more firmly than I felt, we will. That night, after settling Emily into bed and making sure my stepfather had taken his medication, I sat alone in the living room with the letter. I read it again and again, the words steadying me like a compass. Not a reward, a trust. Build something lasting, carry it forward. The weight of her wish pressed against me, heavier than any gear I had carried through the desert. But I knew the truth of weight. It did not weaken you, it shaped you. Muscles grew by bearing it, character hardened by carrying it. I closed my eyes and let my mind wander. I pictured a small building with open doors, light spilling out onto the grass. Veterans sitting at tables with coffee mugs warming their hands, their laughter breaking the silence they carried. Children playing in a yard. Spouses gathered in circles of conversation, each one finding that they were not alone. I pictured walls lined with photographs and flags, but not as decoration, reminders that every story mattered. A place of healing, of belonging. The vision filled me with something fierce, something unyielding. This was not charity, this was a mission, and I had been trained for missions my entire life. But I also knew Daniel. He would not fade quietly. He was clever, persistent, dangerous in his own way. He had never fought wars, but he knew how to wound with words, how to twist truth until it bent in his favor. He had the patience of a man who believed the world owed him and the arrogance to wait for it to pay out. The first sign came 3 days later. A letter from his lawyer arrived in the mail, crisp and cold. It accused me of manipulating our mother, of influencing her decisions when she was in a weakened state. It demanded a halt to the transfer of assets until a full review could be conducted. My hands shook as I read it, but not from fear, from anger. He was trying to turn love into fraud, care into control. He was trying to smear every moment I had spent at her side as if it had been some calculated strategy. I pressed the paper flat on the table, staring at the black letters until they blurred. My training whispered to me in the back of my mind, breathe steady, assess the threat. Respond with clarity. I called Whitman immediately. His calm voice was a bomb. We expected this. It is his first move, but it will not hold. We will respond in kind. But Daniel's moves did not stop with lawyers. Rumors began to trickle into town. People whispering that I had isolated our mother, that I had kept her from visitors in her final days, that I had angled for her trust. Old acquaintances looked at me differently in the grocery store. Their smiles strained, their eyes cautious. It was a different kind of battlefield, one I could not fight with tactics or rifles. Reputation was fragile, and Daniel knew it. One evening, Emily came home from school with her eyes red. They said Mom didn't want you there at the end. They said you forced her to write the will. Her voice broke, her small frame trembling as she tried to understand cruelty far older than she was. I pulled her into my arms, my chest aching. That is a lie, Emily. You know it, I know it, and Mom knew it. Do not let their words take root in you. But as I held her, I felt the fire inside me burn hotter. Daniel was not just fighting for money. He was fighting to erase the truth, to rewrite my mother's love into something ugly. That was war, and I had never lost a war without giving everything I had first. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I sat with my mother's photograph in one hand and her letter in the other. The path ahead was dark, but her voice was steady in my ears. Build something lasting, carry it forward. I knew then that this was not just about fighting Daniel in court. This was about proving her right, about creating something he could never touch, never undo. A legacy stronger than greed, stronger than rumor. A legacy built on sacrifice, on healing, on love. Daniel could throw every weapon he had at me, but I had one he would never understand: purpose. And purpose, once it takes root, cannot be destroyed. The courtroom was not a battlefield of dust and fire, but it carried its own kind of weight. The high ceilings made every word echo louder than it should. The wooden benches creaked when you shifted even slightly. The American flag hung behind the judge's bench, a silent reminder of the ideals that had sent me overseas and now pinned me in this room again. I sat at the long table with Whitman beside me. His calm demeanor was a shield, his notes stacked neatly in front of him. His glasses balanced low on his nose. Across from us, Daniel's lawyer whispered into his ear, feeding him ammunition. Daniel sat stiff, jaw clenched, his suit tailored too tight, his hands gripping the armrests as if he could squeeze victory out of them. The judge entered, and everyone rose. I followed, my body responding out of long habit. Years of standing at attention had trained me to rise with respect even when my bones ached. As we sat again, I let my gaze sweep the room. A handful of local reporters had taken seats in the gallery, notebooks ready, hungry for drama. Emily sat behind me with our stepfather, her face pale but steady. She was clutching the quilt against her chest as if it could protect her. Daniel's opening words dripped with rehearsed sincerity. He painted himself as the devoted son, the rightful heir wrongfully cut out. He spoke of my absence during deployments, of his presence in the community, of how his mother could not have truly meant to leave him with nothing but a ring. She was not well, he said, shaking his head, his voice heavy with feigned sorrow. She was influenced, manipulated. She was taken advantage of in her final days by someone who has always abandoned this family for the army. His words landed like blows, but I did not flinch. I had learned long ago that silence could be stronger than shouting. I sat tall, my gaze steady. My hands folded calmly in front of me. When it was Whitman's turn, his voice carried the gravity of truth. He spoke of dates, signatures, witnesses. He reminded the judge that my mother had come to his office fully lucid, that she had discussed her decisions with clarity, that he himself had ensured every legal requirement was met. The will stands, he said firmly. It is the voice of a woman of sound mind, carrying her intentions for her children. No amount of speculation changes that. Daniel slammed his fist against the table, startling the gallery. His lawyer tried to calm him, but Daniel surged forward, pointing across the room at me. She is not worthy. She wore a uniform and left us behind. She disappeared overseas, chasing medals while the rest of us carried this family. She has no right to inherit what she did not build." The judge frowned, lifting a hand for silence. The room stilled, every eye turning to me. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. I did not disappear. I served this country because our mother taught me what sacrifice meant. I came back when my tours were done, and I held her hand until the very end. I did not leave. I returned, and I kept my promise to her. The words cut through the room like a blade. Even the judge leaned back slightly, as though struck by the force of them. Emily sobbed quietly behind me. Whitman gave the faintest nod, his hand resting lightly on the table. Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came. The silence pressed in, heavier than any verdict. For the first time, he looked less like a man cheated of his rights and more like a boy exposed. His fury faltered under the weight of truth. The judge cleared his throat. "The will is valid. The estate is to be transferred as written. Unless you have further evidence, Mr. Miller, this matter is concluded." Daniel slumped back in his chair, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. He muttered under his breath, words too quiet for the record, but sharp enough for me to hear. "This is not over. I will make sure you regret this." I met his glare with calm resolve. My revenge was not loud. It was not a shout or a fist. It was the truth, steady and undeniable. It was the promise I had kept to our mother, the silence that spoke louder than his fury. As the gavel struck, sealing the judgment, the room exhaled. Reporters scribbled frantically. Emily let out a sob of relief. And Whitman began packing his notes with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done this 100 times. I sat still, letting the moment wash over me. This was not victory in the sense Daniel would understand. There was no prize, no applause, but there was justice, there was truth, and that was enough. Outside, the sky was a pale gray, the kind that hinted at rain but held it back for now. Emily walked beside me, the quilt still clutched in her arms. She looked up at me with tear-bright eyes. "You did it, Sarah. You really did it." I shook my head gently. "No, Emily, Mom did it. I just stood where she needed me to." But inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Daniel's threats lingered in my ears, sharp and poisonous. He would not stop with the courtroom. He would find new ways to strike, but I had something stronger than his rage. I had her trust, and I intended to carry it, no matter how heavy it became. The courthouse steps were a different kind of battlefield. Cameras lined the walkway, reporters clustering in packs with microphones extended like bayonets. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble, and the chill in the air made every breath visible. I had faced crowds before, but never ones hungry for scandal. Daniel emerged first, his lawyer at his side. His face was a mask of righteous fury, his voice pitched to carry across the crowd. "This is not justice. My mother was not in her right mind. My sister manipulated her, cut me out, and twisted her dying words into a weapon. We will not rest until this will is overturned." The microphones lit up with questions, the cameras flashing as though to capture his anger in perfect detail. His wife stood behind him, her hand resting on their son's shoulder, her face a portrait of forced loyalty. I waited until he had finished his performance before stepping forward. Whitman advised me to say nothing, but silence in this moment would be surrender. I had learned in the service that sometimes words were as necessary as action. "My mother was of sound mind," I said, my voice carrying across the steps. "Her will was witnessed, signed, and verified. More than that, her heart was clear. She asked me to carry forward her legacy, not for myself, but for those who have served this country and their families. This is not about greed. This is about trust, and I will honor it." The crowd hushed for a moment. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras turned my way, and the questions began to fly. I did not linger. I turned and walked to the car, Emily clutching the quilt at my side, Whitman falling into step behind us. That night, the local news carried Daniel's words on repeat. Clips of his outrage filled the screen, his accusations painted in bold text. My own words were aired too, but they were framed as part of a family feud, as if truth and lies weighed the same when placed on opposite sides of a scale. Emily sat on the couch beside me, frowning at the television. "They make him sound like the victim." I muted the screen. "He plays that part well, but the truth does not change, Emily." Mom knew what she wanted. She leaned against me, her small frame tense. "I believe you. I always will." Her faith steadied me more than the quiet legal victory had. Yet I knew Daniel's reach was not limited to the courtroom or the cameras. He would spread his version of the story wherever ears were willing to listen. He thrived on appearance, and he would not let the spotlight slip easily. In the days that followed, whispers grew louder. Old acquaintances called, their voices cautious, asking if what they had heard was true. Anonymous letters appeared in the mailbox, some in support, others sharp with accusation. Daniel's lawyer filed motion after motion, each one meant to delay the transfer of assets. It was a war of attrition. And he intended to exhaust me. But while he waged his campaign of noise, I began to build quietly. I met with veterans at the local coffee shop, listening to their stories. Some spoke of sleepless nights, of the weight of silence. Others shared memories of friends they had lost, their voices breaking even years later. I scribbled notes in a worn notebook, not of statistics, but of names, of needs, of truths that had to be honored. I reached out to organizations my mother had once supported, listening to what worked and what failed. I walked the land she had left me, boots sinking into damp soil, and pictured the walls that might rise there one day. A center not of stone alone, but of hope. Each step forward was small, but it was forward, and each step was shadowed by Daniel's attacks. One morning, a local paper ran a headline, "Veteran's Sister or Manipulative Heir, the Miller Family Divide." My photograph was printed beside Daniel's, our faces set against one another like opponents in a boxing match. I traced the grainy outline of my mother's ring on his hand in the photo, the only thing she had left him, and wondered if he even saw its meaning. Whitman called that afternoon, his voice steady but concerned. "He has filed an appeal. It will not change the outcome, but it will buy him time. You must be patient." Patience was something I had learned in the desert, in long nights waiting for dawn, in missions that stretched endlessly with no clear end. I could wait, but I would not stop moving forward in the meantime. Emily helped me sort through boxes of our mother's belongings, her laughter breaking through the heaviness when she found old photographs or letters. My stepfather offered quiet wisdom, reminding me that legacy was not measured in dollars, but in what we left behind for others. Together, we began to sketch the outlines of what the center might look like, and every time doubt whispered, I returned to the letter. Her words steadied me as if she were still standing beside me, her hand firm on my shoulder. "This is not a reward, Sarah. It is a trust. Build something lasting." Daniel could shout until his voice broke. He could smear my name across every paper and drag me through every courtroom, but he could not touch that trust. It lived in me, steady as my own heartbeat. The true revenge was not his humiliation in court. It was not silence or gloating. It was the work I would do, the legacy I would build, the truth I would live. That was what would last. The months that followed were quieter, though never simple. The estate had been settled, the battles fought in court and in the papers, but the work that mattered most had only just begun. I sold the big house, its rooms echoing with too many memories and too many arguments. Emily received her share, and with it the freedom to dream of college without fear of debt. I kept the small plot of land out by the edge of town, where the grass grew tall in the summer and the library's red brick walls stood across the street. It was there that I built what my mother had asked of me. Not a monument, not a fortress, but something gentler. A cafe with wide windows and warm lights, tables big enough to hold laughter and small enough to hold silence. A place where veterans could sit without judgment, where teenagers could do homework, where someone lost in the shadows could walk in and not feel so alone. I named it Haven. The first time I flipped on the lights, I thought of her letter and the way her voice had carried through the lawyer's office that day. It was not a reward, it was a trust, and in those lights, glowing against the rain-streaked glass, I felt the trust alive and breathing. The cafe grew quickly into something more than I had imagined. Old soldiers brought photographs and stories. Families came with children who colored at the tables while their parents sipped coffee. College students found corners to study, their earbuds tucked in but their eyes soft when they looked around. Each person carried something with them when they walked out, a little less weight, a little more warmth. I worked the counter most mornings, the smell of fresh coffee rising with the steam. Some days I wore my old army jacket, not as a uniform, but as a reminder that silence could be strength. People would ask me about it, and I would tell them pieces, never everything. Enough to let them know they were not alone. One gray afternoon, when the rain tapped gently against the windows, I looked up from the espresso machine and froze. Daniel stood in the doorway. He was thinner than I remembered, his suit gone, his shoulders slumped beneath a worn jacket. His eyes searched the room as though he was not sure he belonged. For the first time, he looked less like an enemy and more like a man who had lost every war he tried to win. Our eyes met. For a moment, the years between us stretched wide, full of anger and betrayal. But then I reached for a mug and poured him a cup of coffee. When I set it on the counter, my voice was steady. Here, everyone starts over, no grudges, no debts. He looked at the cup, his hands trembling slightly as he wrapped them around the warmth. His lips parted as though to argue, but no words came. Instead, he lowered his gaze and took a sip. I did not forgive him in that moment, not fully. Forgiveness is not something you grant like a prize. It is something that grows slowly, like light returning after a long storm. But I gave him a place to sit, and sometimes that is the beginning. That night after closing, I sat alone with the letter one last time. The paper was creased now, the ink beginning to fade at the edges, but her words were as clear as the day they had been written. Silence is not weakness. Silence is the strength of those who have walked through battle and still kept their hearts kind. I read the line out loud, letting it echo through the empty cafe. It was her final gift, her final truth, and it was mine to carry. Outside, the rain fell harder, but inside, the lights of Haven glowed warm against the dark. They were not grand lights, not the kind that demanded attention. They were steady, quiet, a beacon for anyone who needed to find their way home. And in that glow, I felt her with me still. In the end, true revenge is not anger or wealth. It is keeping a promise, building hope, and proving that silence can be the strongest voice of all. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Military Revenge, where we honor the battles fought beyond the battlefield.